Alright, so before we dive into the editing portion of this course, which by the way is the most overlooked part of anybody, especially if you're just starting out, for most people who have a home studio, who are recording and mixing their own vocals, the one thing that so many of us skip over is this editing process, is making sure that everything sounds professional, because this is a big factor in eliminating those amateur aspects of your vocal performance. So now I'm going to share with you 3 of the most common vocal editing mistakes you and I need to avoid. So mistake number 1 is not addressing pitch problems. And this is especially for the anti-auto-tune crowd, which I love you guys, y'all are awesome, and I relate to, your worldview quite a bit. But when it comes down to it, especially when you're just starting out, an important thing to remember and to keep in front of mind is your vocal is the single most important thing, right? We've talked about this. And the key is to not be distracting. So let's say you've recorded a vocal and it has some pretty obvious pitch problems. Since you're an anti-auto-tune person by nature, should you just let it be? Or should you swallow your pride for just a second and go in and maybe edit those couple notes that need to be edited so it doesn't sound amateur? I'm not saying your vocal should sound auto-tuned. I'm talking about very light pitch correction here. Because this mistake is like if you're already using auto-tune and you do more pop-based stuff, then you're already using auto-tune, so this mistake is really not one that you make. But this is for those of you who want to pursue that very analog, organic, non-auto-tune kind of sound quality, and which is a great goal, by the way. I love those types of people, and I love that that's what you're pursuing. But here's a little quote that I want you to chew on, and it goes like this: "Don't try to be right, try to sound right." I don't know if somebody else came up with that. I felt pretty good about myself for coming up with that, to be honest. But I think it's a good way of looking at this, especially if you're just starting out, if your pitch isn't very good yet as a singer. Because sometimes you want to be able to do a little bit of Photoshop on the photo if you aren't the perfect photographer yet. You want to be able and allow yourself to, if you've got a few places in your song where your vocal is very obviously pitchy, then use a bit of Melodyne or even a little bit of auto-tune to go in and to smooth it over. The key is, again, don't try to be right, try to sound right. So that's mistake number 1, especially for the anti-auto-tune crowd. It's not addressing pitch problems. Mistake number 2, when it comes to editing your vocals, is ignoring the gaps or the space between your vocal phrases. Now this is very simple. Your vocal track, especially your lead vocal, since that is what is at the front of the mix, it should look less like this and more like this. Notice how I've cut everything up and I've got pretty much all these snippets faded in and faded out. This is crucial, especially once you start to add plugins like compression and distortion and saturation, because those plugins will make that background noise and lip smacks and whatever other noise that noises that could be made. It'll make those nuances even more obvious, which is generally not what you want. So you want to take the time and be vigilant about getting rid of the gaps in between the vocal performance. And just to be clear, this doesn't mean to get rid of the breaths. I cannot stand vocals and songs that have vocals where the breath is completely removed. I think it sounds stupid, it sounds fake. So don't do that. But what I'm talking more about is just you might have an AC unit running in the background. You might have some extra breaths in between or some lip smacks or things of that nature that are adding nothing to your track. They're just they are adding something to your track, and it's called amateurism. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. So make sure that you're taking the time to get rid of those noise gaps in between your vocal phrases. So that's mistake number 2. The third mistake you want to avoid is trying too hard to force an edit to work instead of just re-recording the line. Now, I understand this deeply. I'm the type of person who really doesn't like to re-record things. Once it's in my DAW and I'm editing and mixing my tracks, I really don't like going back to square one. It's just not a fun thing for me. But the truth is, oftentimes, if you're spending a bunch of time trying to fix a really bad take that has awful timing and awful tuning, often the best move is to just drop everything and re-record the damn take and just get a better take. And as Graham Cochran from the Recording Revolution would say, once you get to the mixing phase, your tracks should virtually mix themselves because the recordings themselves are good. So don't spend hours and hours trying to make your vocal be perfectly edited if it's a really bad timed or really bad tuning on it, or the tone is just not there. Sometimes you just need to swallow your pride and take the loss and go back and just re-record the take. It seems like that would take more time, but more often than not, it'll actually take less time because it is amazing how quickly you can edit and mix a great vocal take versus how gruesomely long it takes to edit. And again, using the Photoshop analogy, you Photoshop a terrible photo and it takes so much longer than if the photographer just gets a great photo from the jump. Then you just maybe throw a bit of, adjust the brightness a little bit, adjust the saturation ever so slightly, and boom, you're done. That is what this process should be like. It shouldn't be hours of editing down your vocal track. So that is the third mistake that you and I need to be aware of and avoid, is trying too hard to force an edit to work. Sometimes you just need to swallow your pride and go in and re-record the take.